10 minutes. That is all the time some coastal towns would have. Not hours, not even half an hour. 10 minutes, or in some places even less, between the moment the ground stops shaking and the moment the ocean itself rises up and swallows everything in its path. There would be no time to pack a bag, no time to load the car, no time to wait for a siren or check a phone for an alert. For the people living in the lowest, most exposed towns along the Pacific Northwest coast, the earthquake would be the only warning they ever get, and the race for survival would begin the instant their feet could carry them. This is the reality of the Cascadia Subduction Zone. Off the coast, stretching from Northern California up through Oregon and Washington and past the shores of British Columbia, two enormous plates of the Earth's crust are locked together, straining under pressure that has been building for more than 300 years. Scientists agree it is overdue, and when it finally ruptures, it will not only shake the ground for minutes on end. It will shove the seafloor upward and send a tsunami racing toward the shore at the speed of a jetliner. Because the fault sits so close to land, that wall of water would reach the nearest beaches in as little as 10 to 20 minutes. There is no time for a distant warning to save anyone. The only thing that saves lives is knowing, in advance and by heart, exactly where to run. In this video, we are going to walk through the coastal towns that face the most terrifying version of this scenario. The low-lying, exposed communities that could be almost entirely underwater within minutes of the rupture. We will look at why each one is so uniquely vulnerable, what the wave would actually do, and why the very beauty and flatness that make these towns so beloved are exactly what makes them so dangerous. These are real places where people live and work and raise their families, places millions of visitors love. And understanding their danger is not about fear. It is about the single most important piece of knowledge anyone on this coast can carry. Stay with me to the end, because the last town on this list may be the most exposed of all, and the reason why will change how you think about every beach vacation you ever take. Hashtag why the wave comes so fast to understand the 10-minute nightmare. You have to understand why a Cascadia tsunami is so different from the disasters people usually imagine. When most people picture a tsunami warning, they think of hours of lead time, sirens blaring, orderly evacuations, news reports tracking a wave as it crosses the ocean. That is what happens when a tsunami is generated far away, on the other side of the Pacific, and takes many hours to arrive. But a Cascadia tsunami is not born far away. It is born right offshore, just a few dozen miles from the beach. Here is what happens. When the fault ruptures, the locked edge of the continent, which has been bent and compressed for centuries, suddenly springs back and lurches upward and seaward. That violent motion of the seafloor displaces an enormous volume of ocean water all at once, lifting it and setting it in motion. The water races outward in every direction, and the portion heading toward land has only a short distance to travel. Moving across the deep ocean, a tsunami can travel as fast as a commercial jet. As it approaches the shallows near shore, it slows down but piles up, growing in height, transforming from a barely noticeable swell in deep water into a towering, fast-moving wall as it reaches the coast. For the towns directly across from the rupture, the math is brutal and simple. The wave has only a few dozen miles to cover, and it covers them fast. The first surge can arrive in 10 to 20 minutes, and in some of the most exposed spots, even sooner. That is why there can be no waiting. By the time an official warning could be issued, processed, and delivered, the wave may already be arriving. This is the defining truth of the Cascadia tsunami. The earthquake itself is the warning. If the ground shakes hard and long, the only correct response for anyone near the shore is to move to high ground immediately, on foot, without hesitation. Because the 10-minute clock has already started. Now let us meet the towns where that clock runs fastest. Hashtag number 7, Ocean Shores and the Flat Peninsula. We begin on a low, sandy spit of land jutting out into the Pacific in Washington. Ocean Shores is a beloved beach town, a place of wide flat sands, vacation homes, and easy ocean access, drawing crowds who come to walk the beach and feel the salt air. And that very flatness, that gentle, low-lying geography that makes it such a pleasant place to visit, is precisely what makes it so dangerous. Ocean Shores sits barely above sea level, on a peninsula with water on multiple sides and very little natural high ground anywhere nearby. When the Cascadia tsunami arrives, there is almost nowhere for the water to be stopped, and almost nowhere for people to climb to safety. The wave could sweep across the low peninsula, inundating homes, streets, and the routes leading out. For a town like this, the challenge is stark. Without natural hills to run to, survival may depend on getting as far inland and as high as possible in the few minutes available. And communities like this have had to think hard about creative solutions because the geography offers so little help on its own. Ocean Shores is the opening warning of our list, a place where the flat, sandy beauty that draws people in is the same feature that leaves them so terribly exposed. Hashtag number 6. Westport and the edge of the harbor, just across the water, lies Westport, a working fishing town perched at the entrance to a large harbor on the Washington coast. It is a place of docks and boats and seafood, a hardworking community built right at the edge of the water where the ocean meets the bay, and like its neighbor, it sits low and exposed, directly in the path of a Cascadia wave. Westport faces a double threat from the water. The tsunami would strike from the open ocean side, and the surge could also push into and around the harbor, funneling water into places that might seem more sheltered. The low elevation of the town means that much of it lies within the reach of the inundation, and the few minutes between the shaking and the wave would leave little margin for error. This is a community that has taken the threat seriously, precisely because its people understand the water so well, but geography is a stubborn thing. A town built at sea level at the mouth of a harbor is a town with nowhere easy to hide when the ocean turns against it. Westport is the fishing town living closest to the very source of its livelihood and its greatest danger, the sea itself. Hashtag number 5. Long Beach and the endless low sand, now we travel to one of the longest, flattest stretches of beach anywhere on the coast. The Long Beach Peninsula in Washington is a remarkable spit of land, a narrow finger of low, sandy ground stretching for miles between the ocean and a bay behind it. It is famous for its enormous flat beach, a place people drive on, fly kites on, and gather on for festivals. And it may be one of the most difficult places on the entire coast to survive a great tsunami. The problem is the geography taken to an extreme. The peninsula is long, narrow, and almost entirely flat, with the ocean on one side and the bay on the other, and virtually no high ground in between. When the wave comes, there is no hill to climb, no ridge to run to, nowhere the land rises fast enough to lift people above the water in the time available. Communities strung along the peninsula could be almost completely overtopped. For a place like this, the lack of natural refuge is the defining danger, and it has forced hard conversations about how people could possibly reach safety in time when the land itself offers none. Long Beach is a stunning place, but its very shape, that long, flat, exposed ribbon of sand, makes it a stark example of how unforgiving the 10-minute clock can be. Hashtag number 4. Crescent City and the town the waves keep finding. We move south now, into Northern California, to a town with a haunting history when it comes to the sea. Crescent City sits on the coast in a location that, through a quirk of the underwater landscape and the shape of its shoreline, seems to draw tsunami energy toward it again and again. Over the years, waves generated by distant earthquakes across the Pacific have reached this town and caused damage, making it one of the most tsunami-aware communities on the entire coast, a place that has learned through hard experience to respect the ocean. If distant tsunamis have found Crescent City before, a great Cascadia rupture would be a far more severe threat, and a far closer one. The town sits near the southern end of the Cascadia Zone, and a local rupture would send a wave that arrives quickly and strikes hard. The waterfront, the harbor, and the low-lying areas would be directly in the path. What makes Crescent City so instructive is its history. This is a community that already knows what the sea can do, that has rebuilt before, that takes its evacuation planning seriously because it has lived the danger. And even with all that hard-won awareness, the speed and power of a Cascadia wave would test it to its limits. Crescent City is the town that has been warned by the ocean more than most, and it stands as a reminder that even preparation and experience are pushed to the edge when the giant offshore finally moves. Hashtag number 3. Cannon Beach and the iconic shore now to Oregon, and to one of the most photographed stretches of coastline in the country. Cannon Beach is a picture-perfect town, famous for its dramatic sea stacks rising from the surf, its charming streets, and its stunning ocean views. Visitors come from around the world to stand on its beach and admire the scenery, and that beauty sits right in the heart of the tsunami inundation zone. Cannon Beach is low-lying, built close to the water with a creek running through it, and much of the town lies within the reach of a great Cascadia wave. The very features that make it so beautiful and so accessible, its closeness to the surf, its gentle low ground, its walkable connection to the beach, are the features that place it in danger. When the rupture comes, the people in the town and the many visitors who may not know the area at all would have only minutes to move toward the higher ground at the edges of town. For tourists especially, unfamiliar with the routes and unaware of the danger, those minutes could be fatally confusing. Cannon Beach is a jewel of the coast, and it is also a powerful illustration of how the most beloved places can be the most exposed, and how the crowds who love them may be the least prepared to flee. Hashtag number 2. Seaside and the town with nowhere near to run, just up the Oregon coast, lies a town that experts have long pointed to as one of the most vulnerable of all. Seaside is a classic, bustling beach resort town, packed with visitors in the warm months, lined with shops and hotels and homes, built on flat, low ground right against the ocean. It is a place of boardwalks and family vacations and summer crowds, and it sits almost entirely within the tsunami inundation zone, with the added cruelty that the high ground people would need to reach is separated from much of the town by water. Seaside is crossed by rivers and creeks, and the bridges over them are exactly the kind of structures that can fail during the violent, prolonged shaking of a great earthquake. If those bridges go down, the paths to safety are cut, and people on the wrong side could be trapped on low ground with the wave approaching and no way across. This is the nightmare that has made Seaside a focus of so much concern, a town full of people, including many visitors and children, where the routes to survival may be severed at the very moment they are needed most. The community has worked hard on this problem, studying evacuation and pushing to strengthen the ways out. But the fundamental challenge remains. Seaside is a crowded, low, beloved town where the distance to safety is just a little too far and the obstacles just a little too many. It is the town where the 10-minute clock feels the most merciless. Hashtag number 1, Tofino, Ucluelet, and the exposed outer coast. And so we come to the top of our list, to the far northern reaches of the Cascadia Zone, on the wild and beautiful outer coast of Vancouver Island in British Columbia. Tofino and Ucluelet are stunning resort and fishing communities, drawing surfers and storm watchers and nature lovers to some of the most breathtaking scenery anywhere on the Pacific. They sit right out on the exposed edge of the open ocean, facing directly toward the fault, with no landmass between them and the deep water where the tsunami would be born. That exposure is exactly what places them at the very top. These communities are among the closest to the open Pacific along the whole zone, built on low ground threaded through inlets and beaches, with the ocean pressing in on multiple sides. When Cascadia ruptures, the wave would reach this outer coast among the very first places, with little of the buffering that more sheltered locations enjoy. And these towns, like so many on this list, swell with visitors who come precisely for the raw closeness to the wild ocean, people who may have no idea where the high ground is or how little time they would have. The remoteness that makes this coast so magical also means that help in the aftermath would be slow to arrive, with the connecting roads winding through terrain prone to landslides. Tofino and Ucluelet embody the whole lesson of this video. The most beautiful, the most wild, the most beloved edges of this coast are the ones most exposed to the sea, and the 10-minute window there is as unforgiving as anywhere on Earth. Hashtag, what the wave actually does it is worth pausing to understand what this wave truly is, because most people picture it wrong. A tsunami is not a tall, curling wave like the one surfers ride. It is something far more menacing. It behaves more like the entire ocean suddenly rising and surging inland, a fast-moving wall and flood of water that keeps coming and coming, not for a few seconds, but for many minutes, pushing further and further inland with relentless force. It does not crash once and retreat. It floods, and it holds, and then it drags everything back out to sea as it withdraws, only to surge in again with the next wave, and it does not come as clean water. As the surge moves inland, it picks up everything in its path: splintered wood, vehicles, boats torn from their moorings, propane tanks, entire buildings ripped from their foundations. What sweeps through the streets is a churning, battering torrent of debris, and it is this debris, as much as the water itself, that makes the tsunami so deadly. Even relatively shallow moving water can knock a person off their feet and carry them away, and the loads of wreckage it carries can crush anything they strike. This is why simply climbing to the second floor of an ordinary building is often not enough, and why reaching genuine high ground, well above and beyond the reach of the surge, is the only reliable safety. Understanding this is what turns a vague fear into the clear, motivating knowledge that gets people moving the instant the shaking stops. Hashtag the 10 minutes that decide everything, so picture it. The same terrible scenario playing out in each of these towns at once. The ground begins to shake, and it does not stop. 10 seconds. 30 seconds. A full minute and beyond. The longest, most violent shaking anyone has ever felt, going on and on, until it becomes clear this is no ordinary quake. And then, at last, the shaking eases. In that moment, in every one of these low coastal towns, the same invisible clock starts running, and it is counting down from about 10 minutes. What ties all of these places together is a single, unforgiving truth. They are low, they are flat, they are close to the water, and the high ground that means survival is either far away, blocked by failed bridges, or simply non-existent. There is no time to wait for a warning, because the warning is the shaking itself. There is no time to drive, because the roads may be cracked, jammed, or cut, and precious minutes lost in a car could be the difference between life and death. The only reliable path to survival in most of these towns is to move on foot, immediately, toward the nearest and highest ground, and to keep going up and inland until there is no doubt of being above the water. And then to stay there, because the first wave is often not the largest, and more surges can follow for hours. This is why the people who study this danger repeat the same message with such urgency. Know before you go. If you live in or visit any of these coastal towns, learn where the high ground is the moment you arrive. Walk the evacuation route so your feet remember it. Understand that when the ground shakes hard and long, you do not wait, you do not question, you do not gather your things. You move, and you help those around you who cannot move as quickly, the elderly, the children, the visitors who do not know the way. The 10 minutes are not a lot of time, but they are enough if you know exactly what to do before the clock ever starts. Hashtag the choice made in advance. It would be easy to hear all of this and feel a kind of dread, but the truth is the opposite of hopeless. The remarkable thing about the tsunami threat is that it is one of the most survivable disasters on Earth, if, and only if, people know what to do in advance. The wave is deadly, but it is also predictable. It follows the low ground, it spares the high ground, and it announces itself with an unmistakable signal, the long, violent shaking of the earthquake, that gives those who understand it a fighting chance to reach safety. That is why the communities along this coast have poured so much effort into preparation, mapping the inundation zones, marking the evacuation routes with signs pointing the way to high ground, holding drills, and in some places even building special structures designed to lift people above the water where nature provides no hill to climb. Every sign, every drill, every marked route is a life potentially saved. And for individuals, the responsibility is simple and profound. The single most important thing you can do is to know your route before you ever need it, to make the decision to run in advance so that when the ground shakes you, do not lose a single one of your precious minutes to confusion or disbelief. These coastal towns are among the most beautiful places on the planet, and the danger they face does not make them any less worth loving. It simply means that loving them wisely includes respecting the ocean at their door. Offshore, the Cascadia Fault keeps straining, keeps building toward the day it finally moves. No one can say when that day will come. But when it does, the towns on this list will have only minutes, and the people who survive will be the ones who decided, long before the shaking ever started, that when the earth moved, they would already know exactly where to run. That decision, made today, in the calm, is the one that matters most. Make it now.